The best of money matters. The Big Story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin Jeong. More pets in Singapore are being diagnosed with stress, anxiety, and emotional disorders. And while veterinary care has traditionally focused on physical health, an animal's mental and emotional well-being is only now beginning to receive the attention it deserves. From rescued cats struggling to adjust in multi-pet households to dogs displaying aggression or fear, despite training, pet owners are confronting behavioral changes that often stem from deeper psychological issues. And now there's a growing recognition that animals, like humans, require holistic care that addresses both body and mind. And to discuss more about this growing field of pet mental health, joining us today is Dr. Daphne Ang, who is the Emergency and Critical Care and Veterinary Behavior Specialist at Beecroft Animal Specialists and Emergency Hospital. Hi, Dr. Ang. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Ang, more pet owners here in Singapore are starting to realize that animals, like humans, can suffer from stress, anxiety, and even emotional disorders. And I believe you've spent years training internationally in veterinary behavior. So why do you think that pet mental health is only now starting to gain serious attention?
Yeah, that's right. I think that's really exciting, actually, come to think of it. So mental health issues have actually been around for a while, but just like in all, aspects of human medicine, we are kind of a step behind, right? I would think that I credit this to COVID, actually. During COVID, what happened was that a lot more pet owners were staying at home with their pets. So, started seeing a lot of quirks in their pets that they maybe didn't realize there was before. But also at the same time, there were a lot of people that started buying pets, and pet ownership rocketed during that time. A lot of shelters were emptied, and that was a good thing. It was a good thing, but that also meant that we had this many pets that were in the home, and then suddenly the humans had to go back, right? So I think people start realizing, hey, there's something wrong, and also I think it's more that their pets starting behaving differently from when they were at home with them. Okay. Of course, there's that whole awareness amongst the human population about, mental health in itself, how important that is. And pets being a very critical part of our lives, that kind of translates, right? Because everybody sees a pet as someone like a special or precious member of the family, even babies to us, to some pet owners. So they start thinking, oh, is my pet feeling happy? Is there anything that I can make my pet feel more fulfilled or happy? Is she feeling anxious? Things like that. So all these questions started popping up, and people started looking at this in more detail. And once you go online, obviously you have so much more information that maybe perhaps has been there, it's just that no one's actually looking at it. So I think it is gaining traction, and that's a good thing. I also feel it's more of a natural progression for any progressive society, and that's a really good thing.
So I'm intrigued, Dr. Ang, what kind of mental health issues are you seeing in pets today? Are there common conditions that show up more often, perhaps like behavioral problems and so on?
Yeah, so it's a good question you're asking. So I do see a variety of problems. Basically, I see them like a behavioral complaint maybe. And they usually fall in the categories of anxiety, and that will include phobias, compulsive behaviors. That include things like, excessive licking, tail chasing, and of course aggression. But if you look at the whole scheme of things, basically all these behavioral complaints will actually fall under the umbrella of two different groups, and that will be problem behaviors versus behavior problems. So problem behaviors are basically natural or normal behaviors of the species, so dogs, cats, birds, doesn't matter, that maybe potentially the human or the owner finds like a nuisance or annoying, versus behavior problems, which, are usually more excessive expression of the normal behaviors, and potentially that impacts the welfare of the animal. And that usually has underlying disease processes that are involved, that is driving all these problems that's going on. So, with that, usually we have to kind of differentiate between that before we even think about how we should actually approach these problems.
Right. Are there any early signs, pet owners can see from their pets? Perhaps maybe they're, a bit sad or, sleeping a lot, not very active as before. Some of those red flags that kind of would tell the pet owner maybe they have a mental health disorder?
Yeah, I guess mental health disorder is a little bit kind of complicated to unpack. So I won't really see that in terms of mental health disorder first. I mean, again, going back to your question before, it's just differentiating. And then, of course, the way I approach any of this to actually dive more deeply is to ascertain, firstly, whether there's a problem, educate the owners in terms of like how we differentiate that. And then I look at in a more holistic approach. So I usually will think about 4 modalities. So one would be health and wellness. Second would be managing the environment. Third would be maybe the use of medication. And the fourth would be what we call behavior modification. Now, if I were to expand on that, behavior issues can potentially be driven by just physical ailments of the pet. So a lot of times, for example, pain is very underdiagnosed. And as you would think, if the dog or the cat was feeling a little bit painful, if I were to touch the cat or the dog, they might bite me. So most people say, oh, my dog's being aggressive to me, right? But actually underlying all this is because he's having some pain or discomfort somewhere. So looking in, through this lens is really important for us to actually distinguish between whether there is other things that's potentially contributing to that. And then looking at the environment, is there like a conflict in terms of like how the environment is set up such that it's causing me frustration to the animal? And then, maybe the use of medication, should this be imbalance of, say, neurochemical disorders that potentially we might need, pharmaceutical help to actually augment. And then behavior modification training, it's more a specialized training that it's like how we do therapy in humans, right? Exposing the animal to something that perhaps they are not comfortable with or find challenging, and equipping them with skills and strategies to help them overcome this. Now, if we look at all these modalities, there are some problems that could be treated with 1 or 2 or maybe just 1. It is very complicated. And, there's this expert who, Dr. Susan Freeman, used to say, the study of behavior is a study of one. And indeed, that's true, right? Because everyone is different. Every context is different. Everybody carries a different genetics, also different physical health. All their conditions will contribute to the behavior. So individually, we have to kind of look at, are there other things that contribute, and then go from there in terms of how whether this is really a mental disorder or is this actually just something else that's potentially driving this.
I mean, you've shared that an animal's early life experience, trauma, or even genetics can play a role. And some behavioral issues are subtle, while others, as you've mentioned, escalate to, aggression or withdrawal. So using the example of one of your patients, Oreo, the dog, where previous training or methods had failed, could you share how you assessed his situation and what eventually helped Oreo improve?
Yeah, so basically this case kind of surrounds the fact that, Oreo was a new dog that was introduced into a family. So, the owners adopted this dog, and Oreo being, from somewhere else, had to actually be acclimated into their, family kind of dynamics. And that can be potentially scary for any dog or even for any human, right? They don't really attach purpose like we do. So you go into this family, it's a whole new environment. Potentially that can be scary. And if we don't kind of address that, seeing that the dog was withdrawn and scared, then we might actually aggravate the problem if we were to think maybe, this dog's just trying to be silly or this dog's trying to be stubborn, right? So we always put on labels. Right. So my first approach is usually to understand in context, where did this dog come from? What's the genetics? Because every breed is different. And certainly Oreo is a Singapore special. Singapore specials, they are a little bit different. That's why we call them Singapore specials. And they are definitely different in terms of say compared to, say, a golden retriever or pug, or any other breeds. They all come with different behavior attributes. They have different personalities already in their own. And then the genetics itself, of course, will be different. We don't know how, the mom was or the dad was. And potentially they do have, anxiety or risk of anxiety or the anxiety gene, then that could be transferred to them, right? So we're bringing an unknown to the family, and then now the resident, so they had another dog, so the resident dog has to take that upon himself to also kind of welcome this person or this dog to the family. So the dynamics would change because now it's no longer just him. It's going to be both of them, right? And so dogs in general, usually to feel safe, they need to feel like, they're in control of their situations, that their resources are available. Oreo wouldn't know that when he first come, right? He's not going to think, oh, I'm going to this nice house. He's not going to think that, right? So they can just, I guess, act in the way that, potentially helps them feel safe. And then navigating that. So I think what's important usually, like in this case, is to educate the owners that, you're bringing an individual into the family. So you think about, like, even if you're adopting a child, right? How do you make this child feel comfortable? So the same way we have to think about, what is this dog sensitive to? Is there anything that the dog might not like or might be scared of? How do we make him feel more comfortable? So educating them in terms of how does he communicate? So knowing how he communicates really tells us how he's feeling. And if we know how he's feeling, then we potentially will know how he's going to react, right? So if I know he's going to be really nervous, then the last thing I want to do is like impose on him and try and interact with him, try to like shove my other dog and be his friend, right? So it's just to give him time to kind of, get used to the family dynamics, to see what's actually happening around. Dogs don't, they live in the moment, but at the same time, they use their senses all the time. They don't speak a language. The first thing, of course, is really to educate the owners, and then we bridge that gap, right? So we make sure that individual dogs are comfortable in their own self. They're comfortable with having another, being inside, a new individual. And if they're not, then how can we actually mitigate this? Do we let them have their own space rather than try and impose on them? And then, of course, enforcing and making sure that everybody, is on the same page, right? So we're treating individual dogs the way they, individualize in that sense, right? So it's not like, one plan fits all, but it's how we approach individual dogs, making sure that individual dogs have no other problems that potentially can contribute, to the failure of the relationship moving forward, and really trying to set them up for success in building that relationship further onto this, right? So slow and easy and really systematic kind of approach.
Well, when it comes to treatment, you've used behavioral modification, medication, and even environmental changes tailored to each animal. Could you walk us through the steps you typically take when designing a treatment plan? Where do you actually start, and how do you know what combination will work best?
I usually will look at the individual itself in terms of what are the behaviors we're actually looking at, right? And what motivates this behavior. So as I've mentioned before, earlier on, about how is it really a behavior problem or a problem behavior? What is actually driving this? So say, for example, my dog's chewing. Is my dog chewing because he's bored? Is he chewing because he's frustrated? Or is he chewing because he's really scared and phobic? So puppy would chew, and that's normal. Some people find that irritating, right? Annoying, because he's like chewing everything. But if I provide like an alternative to chew on, then perhaps this behavior disappears, gets abated, versus like a dog who's actually chewing because he's really scared and he doesn't know how else to cope. So he's destroying the house, potentially also making himself feel worse, right? So, or that he's hurting himself. If I look individually, ascertain that, what is the real cause that's motivating these behaviors, then I'll try and address them specifically. Medications are just a tool. A lot of people have a misconception that medications, make them feel zombie or make them really sleepy, but that's not really the case. It's usually really to augment so that, their emotional state is much better. They're clearer in terms of like how they perceive their environment and how they perceive the stress. It gives them a little bit more control over their emotions so that, when you start teaching them like skills, so that, when they interact with the things that they are feeling uncomfortable with, you can actually kind of, move forward much faster. So in that way, usually it's really complicated to kind of get into the nitty-gritties of it. But in terms of the approach is usually, again, the study of one. We want to know what's actually driving this. Is this really like truly a brain emotional disorder, or is it really a physical disorder or a combination? And then treating individually each of these motivators, and then getting other modalities to help them. So whether it's behavioral modification training, or is it just adjustments to the environment? Do I maybe need to leave my dog alone so that he can decompress? Maybe perhaps I can, enrich his life a bit, give him a lot more activities to do so that, he feels much more encouraged, or like he feels safe or fulfilled, such that he doesn't feel as frustrated. So again, really a whole more holistic and different modalities that come into play when we really think about treating, individual disorders.
But the sad reality is that not all pet owners, seek medical help. Some even still turn to pet communicators or rely on generic online advice. How do you approach conversations with owners who might be skeptical of science-based behavioral treatment?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. In general, I think the unknown is always scary, right? And I think there's always been, even for human psychiatric medication, there's a lot of taboo behind that, right? So they always want what's best for obviously the pet of their loved ones. Now, I usually don't have any judgment. So when a pet owner comes in, it's more about me having, conversations about the different options. So as a clinician, obviously, my approach has always been around evidence-based medicine. This means really tying experience with science. There is no, as vets, we make a lot of life and death decisions, so it's really unethical and irresponsible if I were to say dabble in like hearsay or leave it to chance, right? I need to be able to use the science or whatever information that's available to tell you like, okay, here we have a problem. I have this data behind us. What is it going to help you? Is this solution that we're thinking about, is it based on chance, or that we really do have hardcore, data to say that, well, this has happened in, this part of the world, how many dogs have been treated for this, and then this is the outcome, right? So in the same way as if it's my daughter who's going in for anything at all, if she's unwell, then I want to know, like, what's out there, what's going to solve my problem, what's going to give her the best chance, right? So usually my conversation would be around that. I usually will ask the owners, what are their goals, what are their expectations, and how important it is for them to actually find resolve. Is it time sensitive? Is there safety involved? I mean, all these are very important questions or reflections that one has to do, right? At the end of the day, I cannot make that decision for the pet owner. They have to make a decision based on the information I've given them. And then, of course, I hope that they make, a sound decision based on their experiences or what they're comfortable with. So my role is really to provide all these options, kind of journey this with them and help them whichever way I can, so that we do have the best solution for the pet.
Well, now you're also running a study to understand behavior issues among pet dogs here in Singapore. So Dr. Ang, what are you hoping to uncover from this research? Are there any patterns emerging already, maybe based on breed, housing type, or adoption background?
I think you hit on the nail, really. So there was this big study that was done in Finland. I think it's 13,000 dogs, and they were basically trying to ascertain the prevalence of certain, anxiety disorders. So I find it really interesting. I mean, if we know we have this data for local dogs, right? So basically my survey is on the behavior attributes in our local community, our local population of dogs, whether breed really matters, because everybody's saying, oh, does this breed versus this breed, what's their risk, what's the prevalence? So all this will give us a lot of answers, right, in terms of like creating awareness that there are perhaps behavior problems that exist that we maybe have overlooked, and then we can develop strategies to help these dogs. But also, it's kind of like validating, right? To say, oh, is this really what we're thinking, right? Or is it just like, a figment of imagination, right? I mean, with data, there's so much more powerful, right? And then obviously from that, we can actually create a lot more, ways in terms of treatment or strategies that we can help not just our dogs, but, for other dogs around the world as well, to just contribute to that pool of knowledge.
And Dr. Ang, I believe there's a link you'd like to share as well?
Yes, I do. So if anyone's interested in helping me provide their response for the survey, it's bit.ly/petsurvey.sg. So it's bit.ly/petsurvey.sg.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ang, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Thank you. That was Dr. Daphne Ang, emergency and critical care and veterinary behavior specialist at Beecroft Animal Specialist and Emergency Hospital. This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.